Hey everybody, here we are, the last sermon for our last Zoom worship. I wish I could say I saved the best for last, but you're going to have to be the judge of that. I wanted to start off, or I wanted to have this sermon based on the Old Testament reading, the Genesis reading. We generally hear these stories. We can recite these stories. But beyond that, we really don't know what they mean. What ends up happening is frequently they become a barrier to faith as opposed to enhancing or encouraging our faith. And this is what I mean by that. One of the things that so many people have to do, so many youth have had to do, and I've had kids do it too, is write a faith statement, write a faith paper. And when I ask kids to do it, I specifically say, don't tell me what you think I want to hear, right? Don't just blow smoke and make it seem like, oh, I love God and everything makes sense and life is good. Instead, really tell me what you struggle with. What are your doubts? What are your concerns? All of those kind of things. Really tell me where your faith is at. And so more times than not, so frequently, the way so many of these statements or papers will begin, and so many actually other conversations I've had with people about faith, but these specifically these kids will say, school teaches me one thing and church teaches me another. And then they go on about school talks about evolution, they talk about dinosaurs, they talk about the world being 4 billion whatever years old. And then church says, well, there's only Adam and Eve, the world was created in 7 days. And essentially, if I have to choose, I'm choosing science. I think this whole church thing, this whole Bible thing is a lie. They don't know what they're talking about. And it sends them, down a road in which they just don't buy it anymore. And I think that's such a disservice is when we set these things up as science is here and faith is here and one has to be right and one has to be wrong. If that's the case, I'm choosing science each and every time also. And so I want you to hear, if you have never heard somebody, a pastor or something like that say this, and you feel like you've internalized it or you know it, but you haven't heard somebody say it, I have no problem saying Adam and Eve are not historical people. They never existed. Humanity doesn't come from a man and a woman 4,000 years ago, right? As if everything was already as it is. And I have no issue saying the world was not created in 7 days, right? I firmly believe the earth is 4 billion years old. The universe is, Big Bang and the universe is expanding and who knows where we're going to be in millions of years, assuming we still have a world in millions of years. We haven't destroyed ourselves, but I digress. And so I just want you to know that. And so we don't read these stories literally. We read these stories to understand what it means to be human, what it means to have this call placed on our life by God, and what is this relationship that we have with God? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for the world? And so what I like to say about these stories, it isn't so much that they happened, it's that at some level they are still happening. And so we don't read them literally. And in fact, the Bible, I believe, almost tells us right away in the first 2 chapters not to read these stories literally, because we have 2 creation stories. I've even alluded to them here. We have the creation story in Genesis 1, and what that is saying, right, that's the one the world is created in 7 days. God, there was night and there was day, God called it good. And let the earth bring forth plants, and God called it good. And put the sun in the sky, right, and called it good. And at the end of Genesis 1, we get God created man and woman, male and female, together. God created them in the image of God. And God didn't just call it good when he looked at everything that God had made. God called it very good, right? That's Genesis 1. Then we get Genesis 2, and it says in another creation account. And this creation account, the way this one unfolds, and this is the one we're coming into and are reading from this morning, we have God creates human Adam from the dirt, from the dust, and then creates everything else, all the plants and the rest of creation. And then it's not good for the man to be alone, so God creates animals. And Adam names all the animals. The man names all of them. But then none of them are found to be a suitable partner. So then God creates a female or a woman to be a suitable partner, right? So right away, we already have discrepancies in the Bible. Contradictions, if you want to say. I don't want to say contradictions because they're not trying to contradict each other and say one is right, one is wrong. Instead, they really can go hand in hand. Genesis 1 tells the creation of the story one way. Genesis 2 tells the creation a different way because they're trying to convey different things. They're not saying this is what happened. They're trying to understand what's going on in the world, who God is and who they are. And these stories were crafted and conveyed and shared over centuries. And then eventually written down to eventually help them understand even more so what's happening in the world. And that's how we can use them today. What do these stories have to tell us about what's happening in the world today, who we are and who God is? So let's get into Genesis 3. This is what's going on in the story so far, right? I mentioned it before, Genesis 2, this is a creation account of the man and the woman. The man is created first, then everything else is created, and then the animals, and then the woman is created. And now God gives this man and the woman and says, essentially, the whole garden is yours, the whole world is yours, but don't eat of the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, the fruit of knowledge, right? Just don't do that. And so the man and the woman are wandering around, and then the serpent enters the story. And this is what the serpent says. Don't listen to God. Don't trust God. There's more to it. Go ahead and eat it. Because, if you do, God, you're going to become like God. And that's not what God wants. So God's lying to you about it. Trust me instead. And so now the man and the woman have a decision. Do we trust what God has said? Do we trust what the serpent has said? Because the serpent makes it seem like, man, if you eat this fruit, great things are going to happen. And so the woman listens to the serpent, takes the fruit, eats of it, gives it to the man, eats of the fruit. And then what happens is after they eat, they realize something. They realize they're naked. Their eyes were opened. And now they have to cover themselves up with fig leaves and whatever else they can find. And now God comes in and says, where are you, right? This is the part of the story that we have. This conversation between God and the man and the woman over this conscious decision they made on whether they were going to listen to the serpent or whether they're going to listen to God. And to me, that really is what the story is about. God created, and in Genesis 1 called them very good, right? It is imbued with a goodness the creation is. The man and the woman are able to walk around totally content in who they are. Right? They can be vulnerable. Can you imagine being so vulnerable you're okay walking around naked, everybody's seeing everything, and really to being no big deal? Oh my gosh, right? That is like the peak of vulnerability. And so here the man and the woman, they're at the peak of vulnerability. But yet they decide not to listen to God. They listen to something else. They listen to the serpent that says, nah, God's lying to you. And they listen to this other voice. And when they listen to this other voice, when they don't listen to God, it's like all of a sudden who they were isn't enough. Not because God said who they were wasn't enough. Because they decided what God said wasn't true. And so all of a sudden they become not enough because of those decisions, because of that. Right? Who do they trust? Do they trust God? Do they trust the serpent? Don't we have that question faced before us every day? Who do we trust? Do we trust what God has said? That we are good, very good, and we have inherent goodness, and we can be vulnerable, and we can live, and we can risk, and we can do all these things? Or do we listen to other voices that say, nah, you need this, then you'll have everything. You need to accomplish that, and then you'll be worthwhile. You need, and then, right? Is that the voice we listen to? It's not, I don't believe it's even, right? It's not the fruit that they ate like it was this magical fruit that all of a sudden, whatever the substance was in the fruit, that changed the way Adam and Eve viewed things. It was the fact that they didn't trust God that really is what opened their eyes, or what helped them see things in a different way. The rest of the Bible is people struggling with that same thing. God calling us, God pulling us close, God telling us who we are, and us just being resistant to it. That's what the second creation story is about. Whose voice are we listening to? Whose voice are we going to give power and authority to? Whose voice are we going to let direct and guide our lives? Remember, you still have inherent goodness. So even when we listen to other voices, God doesn't take back what God says. But when we listen, we can experience it. When we listen, we can enjoy it. When we listen, we can live into it. And we can live from it, and we can proclaim that to others. We can give a counter voice to the world and tell them all who they are and who God is. That is the voice that the world needs to hear. The voice of a God who loves, the voice of a God who forgives, a voice of a God who empowers and who strengthens. Do you see what I mean now when I said these stories from the Old Testament, from Genesis to creation? It's not that they actually happened. It's that they are still happening. Every day we are confronted with that serpent's voice in our mind, in the world, that says, don't listen, don't trust what God has said. Trust these other things. I like to say, I put in the way, this way. We are asked to trust the Creator, not the created. The created will always fail. The created breaks down. The created can't create life, so it can't give life. Rather, we're asked to trust the Creator of all things. Now listen to the voice that says, you are loved. Amen.